Yo, yo, stop whatever you're doing. Put your phone flat on the table, turn the volume all the way up, and listen to what I'm about to play you, because in the next few minutes I am going to prove to you, with receipts, with timestamps, with the man's own voice, that Kendrick Lamar is not a rapper. Kendrick Lamar is a time traveler. And the internet has finally caught up to what a handful of us have been screaming into the void for a decade. A buried Kendrick Lamar verse just clawed its way out of the archives this week, and the second you hear it you're going to feel the hairs on your arms stand up, because Kendrick is describing line for line, syllable for syllable, the exact war that just detonated across hip-hop this month. Childhood friends becoming enemies. Sides being switched. Casket closed silence. Bodies in the trunk of the culture. And the wildest part? He recorded it years before any of this was supposed to happen. Years before any of this. I need you to sit with that for 1 second, because this is the part nobody was ready for. Kendrick didn't predict it. Kendrick documented it in advance. And once you hear what he said, you will never look at Kendrick Lamar the same way again. Trust me when I tell you, this is the receipts drop of the entire year. Buckle in. So let's rewind the tape. Kendrick Lamar has spent his entire career at war with the version of hip-hop that sells its soul for a check. From the moment Kendrick stepped out of Compton, Kendrick has been the one artist who refused to package his pain for radio and refused to sand down his stories for the algorithm. Kendrick built an empire on truth. And when a man builds an empire on truth, the truth eventually starts building him. Here is what actually happened. A resurfaced Kendrick Lamar deep cut, a track most of the internet had completely forgotten about, got played back this week on a live stream, and the room went silent. Because Kendrick's voice on that track, raspy, urgent, sounding like Kendrick was rapping through a torn throat with a stopwatch clicking in his ear, wasn't just old Kendrick doing old Kendrick things. Kendrick was standing in a booth years ago and describing, in painfully specific detail, the exact people who would betray him, the exact sides that would flip, the exact silence that would follow. Kendrick called every shot on the board before the board was even set up. Now think about what's swirling in hip-hop right now. The game. TD. The whispers about who fired what shots at whom. The West Coast tension that keeps mutating like a virus with no vaccine. Kendrick Lamar sitting in the eye of that storm with the same expression on his face he's worn for 10 years, the expression of a man who already read the last page of the book. Because Kendrick has. Kendrick wrote the last page of the book. Listen to the line. Kendrick raps, a straight-up Compton so-and-so till I'm 6 feet like Iverson, ride or die for mines. It's just me, no side on mines, because I don't need people switching sides on mines. Childhood friends become enemies, don't pay them no mind. Dear mind like Kennedy's, close casket. Say it slow. Childhood friends become enemies. Kendrick said that on a record that was buried before the current war even had a name. Kendrick isn't rapping about a beef. Kendrick is rapping about a pattern. Kendrick is rapping about a system. Kendrick is rapping about the mechanical inevitability of what happens to a boy from Compton when a boy from Compton becomes the biggest artist alive. And here is the eeriest part. Kendrick opens that same buried track with a shout-out to Lil Wayne. A Wheezy F baby name drop. Now, why does that matter? Because months later, Lil Wayne would go public with his disappointment over the Super Bowl. Lil Wayne would voice his frustration about being passed over. And Kendrick, the same Kendrick who once cried on camera begging Wayne not to retire, had to sit and watch his hero refuse to congratulate him. That silence from Wayne broke something in Kendrick. You can hear it in every verse Kendrick has released since. And yet years earlier, on a track most fans had never even properly digested, Kendrick was already predicting exactly that heartbreak. Kendrick was already telling us, pay attention, pay them no mind, they're going to switch on you, keep working. You want to talk about a Nostradamus verse? This is a Nostradamus verse. This is the grassy knoll. This is the Zapruder film of the current hip-hop war. And a lot of us slept on it because it dropped in a moment when the world wasn't ready to hear it. Now, the chatter behind the curtain says that Kendrick has been sitting on this whole moment quietly, watching the culture catch up to what Kendrick already put on tape. Kendrick doesn't need to say, I told you so. Kendrick doesn't need to release a statement. Kendrick doesn't need to book a press run. Because Kendrick already released the statement. Kendrick released the statement years ago. And it's called Every Shot on the Board. Here's where it gets absolutely surgical. Listen to how Kendrick is rapping on that Resurfaced track. The cadence is unmistakable. That raspy, slightly torn Kendrick voice, riding the pocket like a man who cannot afford to waste a syllable. If you're a real Lil Wayne head, you know this cadence. You know this pocket. You know this energy. This is Carter Too Easy. This is Mixtape Wheezy. This is the era of Wayne where every bar felt like it was being spit at 3 a.m. under a single bulb with a styrofoam cup and a stopwatch. Kendrick studied Wayne like scripture. Kendrick internalized Wayne's flow architecture the way a math prodigy internalizes proofs. And Kendrick paid tribute on that track in a way that only another Wayne disciple would even catch. That is why Kendrick's shout out to Wayne on that buried track hits so different now. Kendrick wasn't just tipping the crown. Kendrick was signaling something we didn't have the ears to hear yet. Kendrick was telling us, this is the lineage, this is the bloodline, this is where the technique came from, and one day I am going to be the one who has to defend it. Now I want to walk you through the punchlines on that resurfaced Kendrick record, because there's a conversation floating around right now, largely championed by a certain lyrical philosopher we don't need to name, claiming that Kendrick Lamar doesn't really deal in punchlines. Kendrick doesn't have that in his bag. Kendrick is a storyteller, not a bar-for-bar assassin. And I want you to hear this next line and tell me if that argument survives contact with reality. Kendrick raps, bang the hood like a head-on car collision. Bang his tool like a mechanic under the engine. Read that back. Kendrick just delivered a back-to-back boom-bap double entendre stacked with mechanical imagery that would make any battle rapper on any coast lose their entire mind. This is not the writing of a rapper who lacks punchlines. This is the writing of a rapper who chose, strategically, when to deploy them and when to hold them back. Kendrick has always been a punchline rapper. Kendrick has always had that Wayne-descended metaphor engine humming under the hood. Kendrick just refuses to be defined by the tool when Kendrick has the whole toolbox. Anyway, back to the fire, because Kendrick keeps stacking bars on this buried record like Kendrick is trying to snap a stopwatch in half. Not a high school graduate, hustling is where his passion is. Hit the blunt then passing it. Hit the bottle then passing it. Hit the gas. Hit the brake. Hopping out blasting it. Say that out loud. Feel the internal rhyme cascade. That is not the writing of a man reading a magazine. That is the writing of a man scoring a film in his head as he raps. Kendrick isn't performing on this record. Kendrick is testifying. And you can hear the urgency in Kendrick's voice. Kendrick sounds like Kendrick almost lost his voice recording this track. There's a rasp in it, a hoarseness, a torn edge that makes every consonant feel like a splinter. But that rasp is exactly what pushes the pain forward. Kendrick sounds like Kendrick is racing his own throat to finish the verse before the mic gives out. That kind of urgency is not something you can fake in a studio. Kendrick was feeling the words in real time. Kendrick was bleeding into the microphone. Whispers from inside the building suggest that this track was one of the ones Kendrick almost buried permanently. That Kendrick himself wasn't sure if the world was ready for what Kendrick was saying on it. That Kendrick shelved it because Kendrick knew that if it dropped at the wrong moment, the wrong people would use it as ammunition. And now, years later, the internet has dragged it back to the surface at the exact moment when every bar on it lines up with the current war. Coincidence? I don't believe in those. Not when it comes to Kendrick Lamar. Because here is what people continue to miss about Kendrick. Kendrick doesn't write songs. Kendrick writes prophecies. Kendrick doesn't drop bars. Kendrick drops timestamps. And when the future finally catches up to the timestamp, Kendrick is already 3 albums ahead, quietly amused, working on the next warning. Rewind the tape for a second. Kendrick had already been telegraphing this exact energy on Euphoria. Remember that verse? I learned y'all don't like the West Coast. Friends turn enemies. Y'all switching. Okay, I'm fine with it. I'll push the line with it. That is the same thesis. That is the same doctrine. That is the same Kendrick Lamar operating manual that Kendrick was writing years before Euphoria even existed. The buried track is the seed. Euphoria is the tree. And whatever Kendrick is about to drop next is the forest. Which brings me to the game situation. Which brings me to the TD situation. Which brings me to every so-called ally of Kendrick who has quietly, gradually, started to distance themselves from Kendrick under the cover of industry politics. Kendrick warned us. Kendrick told us on the buried track, no side on mines because I don't need people switching sides on mines. That's not a bar. That's an operating protocol. Kendrick has been running a one-man army since Kendrick was old enough to hold a pen. And every time a former ally slides toward the enemy camp, Kendrick doesn't flinch. Kendrick doesn't tweet. Kendrick doesn't do the press run. Kendrick just files it away. The chatter behind the curtain says that Kendrick has a running list. That Kendrick has been documenting every soft betrayal, every quiet realignment, every industry handshake that came with a knife under the palm. That list is not going to leak. That list is going to become an album. And when that album drops, everyone whose name lives on that list is going to have to explain themselves to the audience. Now, let me pull the camera back for a second, because I want to give you the bigger picture. This is bigger than Kendrick versus Drake. This is bigger than the game. This is bigger than TD. What Kendrick Lamar is quietly building is a documented case against the entire mechanism of modern rap. Kendrick is arguing, with every buried bar, every resurfaced verse, every strategic silence, that the industry runs on betrayal, that betrayal is baked into the contract, and that the only artists who survive it are the ones who see it coming years in advance. Kendrick sees it coming. Kendrick has always seen it coming. And now the internet finally has the receipts. Listen to how Kendrick closes out that buried record. Kendrick raps, "Maybe these jail sentences nothing but a young boy's demise and the reminder every time you walk outside. His daughter, holy way to feed his daughter. He said he hustling harder, hope that no charges get brought up. Trying to stay out of gunplay so he see her tomorrow. Back inside of the gunplay soon as his homies call him for that mission again. On that mission again. Pop another blue pill then feel it lifeless again. Waking up in cold sweats. See that image again. Nightmares of his victims keep on visiting him." Read that back and tell me you don't hear the entire Good Kid, Mad City thesis compressed into a single verse. Kendrick isn't writing a rap song. Kendrick is writing a novel with a stopwatch running. And then Kendrick delivers the closer, and this is where I want everybody paying attention. Kendrick raps, "So when the devil got their tongue, I'll be speaking for them." Say that one more time. When the devil got their tongue, I'll be speaking for them. That is Kendrick's entire artistic mission statement. Kendrick has appointed himself the voice of the voiceless. Kendrick has appointed himself the translator of the streets. Kendrick has appointed himself the man who will testify when everyone else is too scared to open their mouth. And Kendrick did it on a track most of us hadn't even memorized. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, okay, but is Kendrick actually psychic? Is Kendrick actually a time traveler? And the answer is no. Kendrick isn't psychic. Kendrick is something scarier than psychic. Kendrick is a pattern recognition machine wrapped in a Compton hoodie. When you rap to real emotion, not to sell records, not to chase a trend, not to please a label, your work becomes accidentally timeless. Kendrick doesn't age. Kendrick's records don't age. Because Kendrick isn't writing for the moment. Kendrick is writing for the mechanism. And the mechanism keeps repeating itself. That is why Kendrick's buried track sounds like Kendrick is describing this exact week in hip-hop. Because the mechanism of betrayal, the mechanism of switching sides, the mechanism of childhood friends becoming enemies, is not new. It's older than rap. It's older than America. Kendrick just described it with such surgical honesty that every time it repeats in real life, Kendrick's verse gets pulled off the shelf and dusted off again. The wildest part is Kendrick knew that would happen. Kendrick knew that the truth he was recording would keep resurfacing because the pattern he was documenting would keep recurring. Kendrick built his catalog to be excavated. Kendrick built his catalog to be studied. Kendrick built his catalog like an archaeologist burying artifacts for future generations to find. And now future generations, meaning us, this week, right now, are digging them up. Load the chamber and answer this honestly. How many rappers alive right now could survive their old verses being pulled up and matched against current events? How many rappers could handle the internet running a side-by-side comparison of their old bars and today's headlines? Almost none. Because almost none of them were writing about the mechanism. Almost all of them were writing about the moment. Kendrick was always writing about the mechanism. That is why Kendrick's catalog is bulletproof. That is why Kendrick's catalog will still be relevant in 50 years while other catalogs will feel like time capsules. Aimed at the artery, not the arm. That's how Kendrick writes. Kendrick doesn't jab at his opponent's wardrobe. Kendrick doesn't scratch at his rival's feelings. Kendrick opens the artery of the industry itself and lets the whole ecosystem bleed onto the page. That is why the Resurfaced track hits so hard. That is why the buried verse sounds like a headline. That is why Kendrick Lamar is not just the best rapper alive. Kendrick Lamar is the last honest historian hip-hop has left. Now, here is where I need you, the person watching this, to do something for me. Because this is bigger than one video. This is bigger than one channel. Kendrick's buried verse deserves a full excavation. So drop in the comments the one line from that resurfaced Kendrick Lamar track that hit you the hardest. The one bar that made you rewind. The one moment that felt like Kendrick was reading your mind through a time machine. I read every comment. Every single one. And I want to build the next breakdown around what you catch. And while we're on the subject, I need to know something else. Do you think Kendrick Lamar is going to address the current war directly on his next project, or do you think Kendrick is going to keep letting his old catalog do the talking? Because there's an argument to be made that Kendrick has already won just by staying silent. Kendrick's silence is louder than most rappers' albums. Kendrick's silence has more streams than most rappers' features. Kendrick's silence sells out arenas. If Kendrick never says another word about the current war, Kendrick still wins because his old bars are doing the fighting for him. But knowing Kendrick, knowing the surgical, precise, unforgiving Kendrick Lamar we've been studying for over a decade, I do not believe Kendrick is done. I believe Kendrick has one more excavation to run on the culture. I believe Kendrick has one more buried project he's about to detonate. And I believe when Kendrick drops it, we are going to look back at this exact week, as the moment Kendrick quietly loaded the chamber before pulling the trigger. The resurfaced verse is not the drop. The resurfaced verse is the warning shot. The resurfaced verse is Kendrick clearing his throat before the sermon. Kendrick is telling us, with every buried bar the internet keeps unearthing, that the biggest Kendrick Lamar moment of the decade is still ahead of us. Not behind us. Ahead. So mark this video. Bookmark it. Save it. Send it to the friend who still thinks Kendrick Lamar peaked. Send it to the cousin who still argues Kendrick doesn't have punchlines. Send it to every person in your group chat who claims Kendrick is overrated. Because when Kendrick's next move lands, and it is coming, I want you to be able to pull this video up and say, I told you. He was writing the ending years ago. He was always writing the ending. Kendrick Lamar is not a rapper. Kendrick Lamar is a historian with a microphone. Kendrick Lamar is a documentarian with a metronome. Kendrick Lamar is a prophet who chose Compton instead of a pulpit. And the buried verse that just resurfaced this week is the closest thing hip-hop has ever produced to a time-stamped prophecy that came true on national television. Now the only question left is who's next on Kendrick's list. Because make no mistake, Kendrick has a list. And Kendrick has been writing on it for years. If Kendrick's old catalog is any indication of Kendrick's future catalog, then somebody on that list is about to have the worst week of their career. Watch. Wait. Screenshot this. Because when it happens, and it will happen, I want you to remember exactly where you heard it first. Drop a comment. Tell me who you think is at the top of Kendrick's list. Tell me which Kendrick Lamar verse you think is about to resurface next. Tell me if you think Kendrick Lamar is the greatest writer hip-hop has ever produced, or if you think Kendrick is still climbing toward the top of that mountain. I want the smoke in the comment section. I want the debate. I want the receipts. And I'll see every single one of you on the next breakdown, because the excavation is not over. It's barely begun. Kendrick Lamar is still writing the ending. And we're just now learning how to read it. And before you close this tab, one more thing you need to hear. Because if you strip the buried Kendrick Lamar verse down to its bones, past the punchlines, past the raspy pocket, past the Wayne homage, past the mechanical imagery, what you find at the center of it is a single, terrifying idea. Kendrick was preparing himself. Kendrick was warning himself. Kendrick was writing the verse he would need to survive years later. That's the level Kendrick Lamar operates on. Kendrick isn't rapping for the audience. Kendrick is rapping for the version of Kendrick that has to walk through the fire tomorrow. And that version of Kendrick, the one currently standing in the middle of the biggest hip-hop war of the decade, is quoting the earlier Kendrick like scripture. Study that. Sit with that. Because that is the difference between a rapper and an architect. Kendrick built the bunker before the bomb ever dropped. And now that the bomb has dropped, Kendrick is the only one still standing without a scratch on him. Screenshot this video. Tag a friend who slept on Kendrick. And come back next week, because I promise you the next Kendrick Lamar excavation is going to make this one look like a warm-up. The archive is deep. The receipts are endless. And the story is only halfway told. Kendrick Lamar. Time traveler. Historian. Prophet. Architect. Remember every one of those titles, because before this year is over, Kendrick is going to earn every single one of them all over again. See you on the next one.